What would you do if the whole world loved you one day and hated you the next? If cameras once cheered your name, but today they flash only to capture your fall? This is the story of a man who wore the crown of wealth too early, who tasted power too fast, and who discovered that the climb to the top is never as dangerous as the fall from it. On the night of his arrest, the billionaire the world had called the Golden Boy stood in handcuffs, his face covered in sweat, his designer suit torn at the collar. Outside, flashing lights blinded him. Journalists shoved microphones at him, shouting questions like knives. Is it true you stole from your investors? Did you cheat the government? Where is your wife? Why did she leave you? But he said nothing. His silence was louder than their accusations. In that moment, he thought of his mother, of the days when she washed clothes by the river, her hands cracked and bruised, whispering, "My son, you will not end in this dust. You will rise." He had risen, higher than anyone imagined. But tonight, as the police car swallowed him, he wondered if perhaps he had risen only to crash. And so, to understand the fall of a king, we must first return to the boy who came from nothing, the boy who once believed poverty was forever. His name was Michael, born in the slums of Ajagunal, a place where the air smelled of smoke, fried plantain, and unfulfilled dreams. He was the third of 4 children, but tragedy marked him before he could even spell his name. His father, a truck driver, died in an accident when Michael was only 5. From that day, his mother, Mama Ruth, carried the weight of 4 children on her back. She was not educated, but she was relentless. She scrubbed floors in rich homes, washed mountains of laundry, sold bean cakes on the roadside. Yet, despite her strength, poverty clung to them like a second skin. Michael's earliest memory of pain was hunger. He remembered nights when the pot was empty and his younger sister cried herself to sleep. He remembered chewing on dry Gary without sugar, his stomach twisting like a rope. But hunger was not the only fire in his life. There was also ambition, a dangerous, glowing ember that burned inside him. At 7, while other children played football in the dusty field, Michael would sit by the roadside, staring at cars that roared past. Toyota, Mercedes, BMW. He would whisper to himself, "One day, I will drive one. One day, I will not walk barefoot." Mama Ruth believed in education with a kind of faith that was almost blind. "Michael," she would say, dipping her hands into soapy water, "books will take you where money cannot. Read, my son. Read until your eyes burn." But there was no electricity in their one-room shack. At night, Michael read by candlelight or by the dim glow of kerosene lamps. When even that failed, he would walk to the street corner where a flickering electric pole buzzed, spreading faint light. He would sit under that pole with his schoolbooks while mosquitoes feasted on his skin. Passers-by mocked him. "See this boy? He wants to be professor, but he no get shoes." Michael did not answer. He kept reading. In his heart, he carried a secret vow. He would not die poor. By 12, he was already working, selling sachet water in traffic after school, polishing shoes for bankers who sneered at him, carrying cement bags at construction sites. Every naira he earned, he saved, not for food, but for books. The first miracle came when he won a government scholarship. It was the day that changed everything. He still remembered sitting in the crowded hall, sweat dripping down his neck, when the principal announced, "The best student in this district, the one who will receive full sponsorship, is Michael Ruth's son." The hall erupted in whispers. Some clapped, others scoffed. But Michael stood frozen, trembling as tears blurred his eyes. For the first time, his mother hugged him so tight he thought his bones would break. "You see, my son, God has opened the door." That scholarship carried him to secondary school and later to university. In university, Michael was different from other students. He didn't waste time chasing girls or drinking beer. While others partied, he was in the library. When his classmates slept, he was writing business plans. And yet, poverty followed him even there. He often wore one pair of trousers for a whole week. He ate once a day, stretching his meager stipend. But his eyes were always on the bigger picture. During his 3rd year, Michael started his first business, reselling secondhand phones. He would travel to Computer Village, buy used devices, repair them cheaply, and sell them to his classmates. He failed many times. Once, he invested all his savings into 10 phones, only to realize they were stolen property. The police seized them. He almost gave up. But giving up was not an option. If poverty did not kill me, he told himself, failure will not either. By the time he graduated, Michael was known as the hustler who never sleeps. His reputation was spreading. Michael's first big break came when he launched a small IT company with 3 friends. They worked out of a cramped one-room office with one borrowed computer. The beginning was brutal. Weeks passed without clients. Some nights, they slept on the office floor because transport money was gone. Then came the contract that changed their lives, developing software for a rising bank. They delivered on time, flawlessly. Word spread. More contracts followed. Investors came knocking. Within 5 years, Michael was no longer the barefoot boy from Agigunal. He was a millionaire. By 35, he was a billionaire. The transformation was breathtaking. Private jets, mansions with marble floors, invitations to speak at global conferences. His face on the cover of Forbes magazine, labeled the Golden Boy of Africa. He was praised as a genius, a visionary, a philanthropist. He built schools in villages, hospitals for the poor, scholarship programs for children like himself. The world bowed to him. Presidents shook his hand. Celebrities wanted his friendship. He was the story every young dreamer pointed to. Proof that rags could indeed turn to riches. At home, he married his university sweetheart, Anita. She was beautiful, graceful, and had stood by him through his early struggles. Together, they had 2 children. The picture was perfect: success, wealth, and family. But perfection is a dangerous illusion. For even as Michael climbed, shadows followed him. Some of his friends whispered that he was becoming arrogant. Investors warned that he was expanding too fast. His mother reminded him, "My son, do not forget where you came from." But Michael was deaf to warnings. He was too busy building, too busy proving himself, too busy shining. The boy from Agigunal had become a man the world worshipped. But he was about to learn that the same world that cheers your rise will cheer even louder at your fall. And fall, he would. Success does not happen in a single day. It builds quietly, like a fire that begins with a spark and grows into a raging flame. For Michael, that spark began in a tiny, suffocating room where 3 friends shared one borrowed computer and a vision too big for their pockets. Their startup was nameless at first, just an idea scrawled on papers stained with sweat and coffee. But in Michael's mind, it was already an empire. He told his partners, "We are not here to survive. We are here to change the future. One day, this name will be on skyscrapers." They laughed at him, not because they doubted him, but because they couldn't imagine skyscrapers when they barely had food for lunch. Still, they worked. They worked like men possessed. Their first project was small. A local cyber cafe owner wanted a system to track his customers. Payment was meager, but Michael treated it as if it were a billion-dollar deal. He stayed awake 3 nights straight, rewriting codes, fixing errors, learning new programming languages from borrowed textbooks. When they delivered the final product, the client stared at the screen and whispered, This is perfect." It wasn't perfect, but it was better than anything he had seen before. That satisfaction was fuel for Michael. He realized something powerful that day: quality attracts opportunities. The cyber cafe owner told his cousin, who told a banker, who told a politician. Soon, their little company was taking jobs that brought in more money than they had ever touched before. The turning point came when a mid-sized bank struggling to digitize its operations invited them to bid for a software project. Michael's competitors arrived in suits, armed with expensive presentations. He and his friends came in with cheap shirts and a second-hand projector that flickered like a dying candle. But when Michael spoke, the room went silent. He didn't talk like a salesman. He talked like a man who understood struggle. He told the bank executives, "Technology is not about machines. It's about people. We will build you a system that understands your people. That is our difference." The executives leaned forward. Some nodded. Some smiled. 3 weeks later, the contract was theirs. It was the beginning of wealth. The payment from that one contract transformed their lives. They moved into a proper office, bought second-hand cars, hired staff. But Michael did not stop. He reinvested every profit, pushing for bigger projects, hungrier clients, and bolder ideas. By 28, he was no longer just a hustler. He was a CEO. It was around this time that Michael married Anita, the woman he had loved since university. She was his calm in the storm, the one who prayed for him when contracts failed, the one who cooked noodles for him at midnight while he worked. Their wedding was modest, just close friends and family in a rented hall. But to Michael, it was the richest day of his life. When their first child was born, he held the baby in his arms and whispered, "You will never know hunger the way I did." Never. It was a promise he intended to keep. In less than a decade, Michael's company exploded beyond his wildest dreams. They built software for major banks, designed payment systems that spread across Africa, attracted investors from Europe and America. By 35, Michael was worth over $1 billion. He bought a mansion with marble floors and chandeliers. He bought a private jet. He wore Italian suits, Swiss watches, and spoke on stages where presidents sat in the audience. The boy who once sold water in traffic was now called the Golden Boy of Africa. The world fell in love with him. Journalists wrote glowing profiles. From slum to skyscraper. The billionaire with a heart. The boy who defied poverty. Forbes placed him on the cover. CNN interviewed him. Universities invited him to give speeches. Whenever he spoke, young people cheered. He told them, "If I can rise from nothing, so can you." But beneath the applause, a storm was brewing. Wealth does not only buy comfort. Sometimes it buys blindness. As his company grew, so did Michael's ego. He began to trust fewer people. He believed only his instincts mattered. He took risks others warned him against. "Why wait 10 years for growth when I can achieve it in 3?" he would say. He built offices in cities he barely visited. He invested in industries he barely understood. Some of his old friends tried to caution him, but he dismissed them with a wave. "You think small. That is why you are still where you are." He was no longer the humble boy from Ajigunal. He was a king who thought his throne was unshakable. At home, success had its price. Anita, once his closest confidant, now felt like a stranger. He was always traveling, always in meetings, always too busy. "Michael, you are missing the children's childhood," she told him one night as he packed his bags again. He kissed her forehead absent-mindedly. "I'm doing this for them, Anita. For us." But she sighed, because she knew what he did not. Wealth that steals presence is a kind of poverty. The cracks were small at first. A delayed payment here, a failed investment there. But Michael ignored them. He believed his name alone could carry the company. When one of his top executives resigned, citing unethical practices, Michael dismissed it as jealousy. When an investor asked for detailed audits, Michael laughed and said, "You don't question a king." But the truth was simple. His empire was expanding faster than his control. On his 35th birthday, Michael threw a party that shook the city. Politicians, celebrities, and foreign investors filled his mansion. The media covered every moment: his gold-trimmed suit, the $1 million champagne, the fireworks that lit the night sky. As the crowd chanted his name, Michael raised his glass and declared, "This is only the beginning. The world has not yet seen what I will become." The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. His mother, sitting quietly in a corner, shook her head. She whispered to her neighbor, "This boy is flying too close to the sun." And she was right. For in the shadows of that glittering party, his childhood friend and business partner, the one who had built the company with him from nothing, stood watching with cold eyes. That friend believed Michael had forgotten loyalty. That friend felt cheated, overshadowed, ignored. And soon, that friend would become the knife in Michael's back. But Michael, drunk on glory, could not see it. At that moment, he was the golden boy, the man the world loved. The billionaire who had conquered hunger, conquered poverty, and conquered doubt. He did not know that empires fall not when enemies attack, but when betrayal comes from within. Michael's empire was at its peak. The skyscrapers carried his name, his face appeared on magazine covers, and his company dominated industries from finance to technology. He had become a symbol of African ambition, the golden boy who had risen from the dust of poverty to command boardrooms around the world. But victory is a dangerous wine. Drink too much of it, and you forget who poured the first cup. Michael had forgotten. His closest friend, Daniel, had been there from the beginning. They met as barefoot boys in Ajigunal, chasing the same dreams, sharing the same hunger. Together, they built the company from scraps. Together, they celebrated the first paycheck. Together, they survived nights on office floors. But as Michael rose higher, Daniel felt himself pushed lower. At board meetings, Michael spoke while Daniel remained silent. At parties, cameras flashed on Michael while Daniel stood in the shadows. When journalists asked about the company's success, Michael said, "It was my vision. forgetting Daniel's contribution. The bitterness grew quietly in Daniel's chest. One evening, after another party where Michael had been hailed and he had been ignored, Daniel muttered under his breath, "You forgot who lifted you when you were crawling." And in that bitterness, betrayal found fertile ground. It began with whispers. An anonymous email leaked to the press claimed Michael's company was inflating profits. Investors panicked. Stock prices trembled. Michael dismissed it publicly. "Jealous competitors," he declared, smiling confidently on television. But behind the scenes, he was furious. He called his executives into an emergency meeting. Who was leaking information? Who was feeding the press? He demanded. His voice was thunder, his eyes fire. No one spoke. But Daniel sat quietly, his face unreadable. Daniel's betrayal was not loud. It was subtle, like poison slipped into wine. He began leaking internal documents, contracts, audits, private communications. At first, just enough to stir curiosity. Then more, enough to spark outrage. Soon, journalists were running daily headlines. Golden Boy's empire built on lies. Fraud at the top, Billionaire's dirty secrets exposed. The fall of Michael Ruth's son. Each article cut deeper than the last. Michael raged. "Who dares question me? Who dares call me a thief?" But the damage was spreading faster than he could contain. At home, Anita noticed the change. He came home later each night, his face tight with anger. Sometimes, he shouted at her without reason. Other times, he locked himself in his study for hours. "Michael, talk to me," she pleaded one night. "You are changing. You are drowning." But he waved her off. "You wouldn't understand. Leave me be." She did leave, not forever, but piece by piece. Her laughter faded. Her warmth grew cold. Their children asked, "Where is Daddy?" And she had no answer. The man she had married was slipping away, swallowed by pride and paranoia. Daniel's final move was brutal. He forged documents showing that Michael had hidden millions in offshore accounts to evade taxes. He bribed insiders to testify that Michael had manipulated contracts. He fed these to government investigators. One morning, Michael woke to pounding on his gate. Police cars lined the street. Neighbors watched as officers stormed into his mansion. They searched his office, seized his computers, handcuffed him in front of his children. As the cameras flashed, the Golden Boy hung his head. The world that once celebrated him now spat his name. Before any court judged him, the media had already declared him guilty. News anchors dissected his every move. Former employees gave interviews, painting him as a tyrant. Politicians distanced themselves, claiming they had always suspected something was wrong. Even his wife Anita filed for separation, taking the children abroad for their safety. Michael sat in a cold cell, his mind racing. How had it come to this? 1 week ago, he had been a king. Today, he was a criminal in chains. It was in that cell that Daniel came to see him. Michael looked up as the guards opened the door. His heart froze when he saw the familiar face. "You?" Michael whispered. Daniel smiled faintly, his eyes dark. "Yes, me." "Why?" Michael's voice cracked. "Because you forgot," Daniel said simply. "You forgot who built this empire with you. You forgot friendship. You forgot loyalty. And now the world will forget you." Michael lunged at him, rage consuming him, but the guards held him back. Daniel leaned closer, whispering so only Michael could hear. "Kings fall, Michael. But sometimes, the fall is pushed." Then he walked out, leaving Michael broken. The days turned into weeks. The investigation deepened. Accounts were frozen. Properties were seized. Business partners cut ties. Michael had nothing left but his name, and even that was now dirt. His mother, old and frail, visited him once. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she held his trembling hands through the bars. "My son," she said softly, "wealth without wisdom is like fire in dry grass. It burns quickly, but it destroys everything." Michael wept like a child. By the time the trial began, Michael's empire was ashes. Investors had withdrawn. Employees had scattered. Competitors had swallowed what remained. And Anita? She was gone, filing divorce papers from abroad. In the courtroom, Michael listened as prosecutors painted him as a greedy monster. Every lie felt like a blade. Every truth, like salt on wounds. The boy who once studied under streetlights had become the man the world despised. Prison is not just about walls and bars. It is about silence. A silence that eats the mind. Michael, once the man whose voice commanded boardrooms, now sat in a corner of a damp cell, listening to rats scratch across the floor. The smell of sweat, urine, and despair filled his nostrils. Every night, he replayed the same thought. How did I get here? From Forbes covers to iron bars. From private jets to prison mats. From the cheers of millions to the jeers of wardens. He had fallen, and the world was happy to watch. Outside those walls, the media was relentless. News anchors sneered. The golden boy has turned to dust. From slums to skyscrapers, now back to slums again. Michael Ruth's son, proof that all billionaires are thieves. Cartoonists drew him in rags, chained like a dog. Social media users turned his quotes into memes, mocking his once famous lines. If I can rise from nothing, so can you, now twisted into. If I can fall from everything, so can you. Even children sang songs in the streets, teasing, golden boy, where is your gold? Michael read these in old newspapers passed around the prison yard, each word cut deeper than any blade. But the worst misery was not the chains. It was loneliness. His wife, Anita, never visited. She had left for London with the children. Lawyers delivered her divorce papers through the prison guards. He signed them with trembling hands, each stroke of the pen like a stab in his heart. His children stopped calling him Papa. They called another man that now. The stepfather Anita remarried after a year. His business partners turned into strangers. Politicians who once begged for his donations now spat his name. Even Daniel, the betrayer, was nowhere to be found. He had vanished into wealth, leaving Michael with nothing but ruin. There came a night when the darkness nearly swallowed him completely. Michael sat on the cold floor, staring at a broken piece of glass he had hidden under his mat. His hands shook as he lifted it. Maybe if I end it now, he whispered to himself, the laughter will stop. The shame will end. He pressed the glass against his wrist, tears blurring his vision. But then, he remembered his mother's face. The wrinkles carved by years of struggle, the hands that once held his as he read under a streetlight. Her voice echoed in his memory. My son, if you die, poverty wins. If you live, you can rise again. He dropped the glass and broke into sobs that shook the cell. 2 weeks later, Mama Ruth came. She was frail now, her back bent, her steps slow, but her eyes still carried the fire of survival. She reached through the bars and cupped his face. My son, she whispered, look at me. Michael lifted his head, ashamed. I am not ashamed of you, she said. The world can mock you. Your wife can leave you. Your friends can betray you. But I carried you in my womb, and I still carry you in my heart. Tears streamed down his face. Mama, I have lost everything. She shook her head. No, you still have breath. And while you have breath, you have power. Do not let misery be your last chapter. Those words planted a seed. In prison, Michael began to change. At first, it was small. He started reading again, law books, business books, even religious texts. He devoured them like a starving man. Then he began helping other inmates, writing letters for those who couldn't read, advising those facing trial, teaching classes on entrepreneurship. Soon, prisoners who once mocked him now gathered around him. Teach us, Oga, they said. The guards noticed too. They saw how fights reduced in his block, how men who once cursed now dreamed. For the first time in months, Michael felt alive again, not as a billionaire, but as a teacher. One day, an inmate handed him a letter. My daughter wrote this, but I cannot read. Please, help me. Michael opened it and read aloud. Papa, I know people call you a thief, but to me, you are still my hero. When you come home, we will start again. I am waiting for you. The inmate broke down in tears, hugging Michael. In that moment, Michael realized something profound. True wealth was not in the billions he had lost, but in the lives he could still touch. 5 years passed. 5 years of silence, of discipline, of slow healing. The world forgot him. New billionaires rose. New scandals filled headlines. Michael became a ghost of yesterday, but inside prison, he became a legend, the man who turned misery into mentorship. And though his empire had collapsed, something stronger was being rebuilt, his character. On a cloudy morning, a guard called his name. Ruth's son, pack your things. Michael frowned. Why? Court has dismissed your case. Insufficient evidence. You're free. He stood frozen. Free? After 5 years of chains? After losing everything? The prison gates closed behind him with a metallic clang. Michael stood in the sunlight. blinking like a man who hadn't seen the world in years. He wore a faded prison shirt and sandals so worn they flapped against the ground. In his hand was a small plastic bag containing everything he owned: a Bible, 2 notebooks filled with scribbles, and a photograph of his mother. He was free, but freedom had never felt so heavy. There was no limousine waiting for him, no cheering crowd, not even a friend. He was alone. The world had forgotten him. Michael walked through the streets of Lagos, a city that once celebrated him. Now, billboards advertised new billionaires. Newspapers at roadside stands carried headlines of men who had replaced him. When people recognized him, they whispered and pointed. Some laughed. Others shook their heads. See him, the golden boy. He used to own half the city. Now look at him. Beggar. He wanted to shout, I am still me. I am still Michael. But his voice caught in his throat. He was no longer the king. He was the outcast. He found his way back to Ajagunal, to the small house where his mother still lived. She opened the door slowly, and when she saw him, her wrinkled face broke into tears. My son, she cried, pulling him into her arms. Michael collapsed against her, sobbing like a child. Mama, I failed you. I lost everything. But she held his face firmly. You did not fail. You lived. And that is enough. That night, they sat together, eating plain rice in silence. And for the first time in years, Michael felt peace. But peace did not last. Days turned into weeks. Each morning, Michael stared at the cracked ceiling of his childhood home, wondering what to do. The world didn't want him. Investors had blacklisted him. Banks refused him accounts. Even the smallest companies laughed when he applied for work. He was the man everyone wanted to forget. More than once, he thought of giving up. But every time, his mother's words echoed. While you have breath, you have power. And so he wrote. He filled his notebooks with ideas, sketches of businesses, plans for charities, letters to his children who no longer answered his calls. Writing became his therapy. One afternoon, he was invited to speak at a local church. The pastor had heard how Michael taught inmates and wanted him to address young people. At first, Michael refused. What will I tell them? That I was once a king and now I am nothing. But Mama urged him. Speak, my son. Even broken pots can carry water. So he went. He stood before a small crowd of teenagers, his hands trembling. He looked at their eager faces and began softly. I once had everything. Money, houses, cars. The world called me the golden boy. But I lost it all. I was betrayed. I was mocked. I was forgotten. Yet here I stand. And if I can stand, so can you. The hall was silent. Then, slowly, applause broke out. Some wiped tears. Afterward, young people crowded him. Teach us, sir. Show us how to rise from nothing. That day, something lit in him. A fire not for money, but for purpose. With no capital, no investors, Michael began small. He started a foundation from his mother's sitting room, mentoring jobless youths. He taught them how to write CVs, how to start small businesses, how to dream despite their poverty. At first, only 5 came, then 10, then 50. Soon, his mother's house could not contain them. People began to notice. Journalists wrote new headlines. From prisoner to mentor, the rise of Michael Ruth's son. Donors from abroad sent small contributions. NGOs invited him to speak. Slowly, his name began to heal. But the road to redemption is never smooth. A former associate visited him one evening with an offer. Michael, I can help you return to power. One deal. Quick money. No one will know. The old Michael would have jumped at it. But prison had burned arrogance out of him. He shook his head. No shortcuts. I'd rather remain poor than return to chains. It was his first real test, and he passed. 2 years later, news reached him that Anita was back in Nigeria. At first, he felt anger. She had abandoned him in his darkest hour. She had remarried. She had taken his children. But one afternoon, she appeared at his mother's door. She was thinner, her eyes tired. Michael, she whispered, I came to apologize. I was afraid. I thought you were finished. I was wrong. He studied her for a long moment. The pain was still there, but so was something else, peace. I forgive you, he said quietly. But I am not the man I was. I am building something different now. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Their children, now teenagers, hugged him awkwardly. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a beginning. Michael's foundation grew. From Ajagunal, it spread to other states. From Nigeria, it reached other countries. He was invited to the UN to speak on poverty and resilience. His story, once of scandal and shame, became a story of hope. The same media that mocked him now praised him. The Phoenix billionaire. From ashes to impact. And though he never regained his old billions, he gained something far richer. Influence that changed lives. At a youth conference in South Africa, Michael stood before thousands. His voice was steady, his eyes clear. I once believed wealth was in mansions and cars. But true wealth is in what you give. I was betrayed, I was broken, I was forgotten. Yet I rose. And so can you. Let my life remind you. Pain can destroy, but it can also purify. Misery can kill, but it can also teach. Redemption is real if you choose it. The crowd erupted in cheers. Some shouted his name. Others wept. And in that moment, Michael knew he had risen again. Not as the golden boy, not as the billionaire, but as a man redeemed by fire. That night, back in his hotel room, Michael opened his old notebook. He flipped to the first page, where years ago he had written a vow. I will not die poor. He smiled sadly. I may not be the richest man alive, he whispered, but I am not poor. Not anymore. Because wealth was no longer measured in dollars, but in lives changed. And that was the fire of redemption. The newspapers had started calling him the Phoenix Man, the billionaire who burned to ashes and rose again. But Michael did not see himself as a phoenix. He saw himself as a survivor, a man who had walked through fire and come out scarred, but alive. And now, with scars as his new crown, he was ready to rebuild. Not for fame, not for money, but for something greater. The foundation had grown beyond his imagination. What started in his mother's sitting room was now active in multiple African countries. Every week, young people sent letters. Because of you, I started my own business. Your words stopped me from ending my life. I believe again because you believed in me. But Michael was restless. He knew words were powerful, but action was stronger. He wanted to build again, not just a company, but a movement. So he called a small team together. 5 young men and women he had mentored from scratch. We will create businesses that change lives, he told them. Not just for profit, but for people. They looked at him with wide eyes, hungry for direction. This was not the old Michael, the arrogant golden boy. This was a man reborn. At first, no one wanted to do business with him. His name was still stained. Banks refused him loans. Investors rolled their eyes. Michael? The ex-convict? The fraud? Never. But he did not beg. He started small, funding projects with whatever donations the foundation received. The first business was a simple agricultural cooperative. He gathered poor farmers, gave them training, and connected them directly to buyers. Within months, their incomes tripled. Then came a renewable energy project, cheap solar panels for rural villages. Within a year, entire communities had light for the first time. Word spread. Slowly, people began to trust again. Michael no longer wore Italian suits or diamond watches. He wore simple shirts, the kind that blended him with the people. He no longer flew private jets. He rode commercial flights, sometimes even buses, sitting shoulder to shoulder with ordinary people. And they loved him for it. In markets, women called out, "God bless you, Michael." Children ran to hug him. Taxi drivers refused his fare, saying, "You inspire us. Ride free." The man once worshipped for wealth was now respected for humility. One day, at a global summit in Dubai, Michael walked into a hall filled with leaders and investors. Whispers spread immediately. Is that not the disgraced billionaire? Why is he here? Some sneered. Others laughed. But Michael walked calmly to the stage. He began, "Yes, I was betrayed. Yes, I was imprisoned. Yes, I lost everything. But I gained something money cannot buy, wisdom. And today, I am not here to beg for investment. I am here to offer a partnership that will change millions of lives." He laid out his projects: agriculture, energy, education. He showed how small investments could transform entire nations. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Then applause thundered. Several investors approached him after. For the first time in years, doors began to open. Michael never sought revenge on Daniel, the friend who betrayed him. But one morning, he opened a newspaper and saw a headline. Businessman Daniel Oak arrested for fraud and money laundering. Daniel's empire had crumbled. His betrayal had bought him temporary glory, but no foundation. Michael stared at the paper for a long time. Then he folded it and whispered, "I forgive you." It was not victory he felt. It was freedom. Back in Nigeria, Anita and the children began visiting more often. At first, it was awkward. The years of absence had built walls. But slowly, those walls cracked. One evening, his son asked, "Papa, are you rich again?" Michael smiled and pulled him close. "Rich? Yes. Not in money, but in life." Anita's eyes softened. For the first time in years, she smiled at him without bitterness. The world began to notice again, but this time differently. Not as the flashy billionaire, not as the golden boy, but as a man who had risen from disgrace to purpose. He received awards: Humanitarian of the Year, Social Impact Leader, Voice of Resilience. But he no longer chased them. When people clapped, he bowed his head and said, "All glory belongs to God." On his 50th birthday, Michael stood in front of a new building, his foundation's headquarters, funded not by arrogance, but by collective effort. Thousands gathered. Youths whose lives he had changed carried banners. "Thank you, Michael." He looked at them and felt tears burn his eyes. "This," he said, his voice breaking, "is wealth. This is legacy. This is life." And as the crowd cheered, Michael realized something profound. He had returned, not as the billionaire the world once crowned, but as the man who had found his true throne in the hearts of people. The man the world once mocked. There was a time when Michael's name was a joke, a punchline in newspapers, a meme on social media, a fallen golden boy. But years had passed since then. Now, when people spoke his name, they did so with reverence. Not because he was the richest man alive, but because he had become something greater, a symbol of survival, of change, of redemption. Michael no longer chased skyscrapers. Instead, he built schools, hospitals, and training centers across Africa. In remote villages, children who once studied under trees now had classrooms with books and electricity. In poor communities, mothers no longer buried their children from treatable illnesses. New clinics stood where none had before. Thousands of youths, once unemployed, now ran businesses nurtured by his foundation. His empire was no longer measured in dollars, but in lives transformed. Invitations poured in from across the globe. Governments wanted his counsel. Universities wanted his lectures. Organizations wanted his blueprint for change. At the World Economic Forum, he sat on panels with presidents and kings. But when the spotlight turned to him, he said, "I am not a politician. I am not even the richest man in this room. I am simply a man who fell and rose again. And I am here to remind you, wealth is empty if it does not serve people." The hall erupted in standing ovation. At home, the greatest restoration was not wealth, but family. Anita, once distant, now stood proudly beside him at events. Their children, grown into young adults, introduced him with pride. "This is our father." One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Anita whispered, "I never thought we would come back here, together." Michael smiled. "Neither did I. But God writes stories better than we do." For years, he had lost them. Now, they were his again. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole. One day, Michael returned to Ajagunal, the slum where it all began. Children ran barefoot through the dusty streets, just as he once had. Women sold bean cakes by the roadside, just as his mother once had. Standing there, he saw himself in every hungry child, every dreamer with no shoes. He called the community together and announced, "Right here, I will build a free university for children of the poor, so no boy will ever again study under a flickering streetlight the way I did." The crowd cheered, tears rolling down faces. For them, he was no longer just Michael. He was hope. Mama Ruth lived long enough to see her son rise again. One evening, as the sun set over her small compound, she held Michael's hand and said softly, "I told you, my son, you would not end in dust." He kissed her forehead, tears streaming. "Mama, everything I am is because of you." She smiled faintly. "Then promise me one thing. Never forget the poor. They are God's mirror. Serve them, and you serve him." She passed away that night, peacefully, and Michael carried her words like scripture. On his 60th birthday, leaders, youths, and dignitaries from around the world gathered at his foundation's headquarters. The air buzzed with celebration, but Michael stood quietly before the microphone, his hands steady, his voice soft yet commanding. "I stand before you not as the golden boy I once was, but as a man who has been broken and rebuilt. I lost billions, I lost friends, I lost reputation. But I gained wisdom. I gained purpose. And I gained the understanding that true wealth is not counted in bank accounts, but in the number of lives you touch. He paused, looking into the faces before him, some crying, some smiling, all listening. Remember this. Pain can destroy you, but it can also prepare you. Betrayal can break you, but it can also refine you. Misery can bury you, but it can also plant you for a new season. And redemption is not a gift for the perfect. It is a gift for those who refuse to give up. The hall exploded in thunderous applause. Cameras flashed. People rose to their feet, chanting his name. But Michael simply bowed his head and whispered, "Thank you, Lord." In the years that followed, Michael's work spread across continents. Africa hailed him as a pioneer of social transformation. The world recognized him as proof that failure was not final. His name became a case study in universities, the rise, fall, and redemption of Michael Ruth's son. He never regained the reckless billions of his youth, but he gained something that money could never buy, a legacy that would outlive him. In the twilight of his life, Michael sat in his garden, watching children play. The laughter of youth filled the air, the same laughter he once longed for when he was a hungry boy under a streetlight. His son sat beside him. "Papa, when you are gone, what do you want us to remember?" Michael smiled gently. "Remember this. I was a man who rose, who fell, and who rose again. Not for money, not for fame, but to serve. That is true wealth. That is legacy." The camera of life pulled back on him, an old man no longer haunted by failure, no longer blinded by riches, but at peace. And so ended the story of Michael Ruth's son. A story of pain, a story of misery, a story of redemption, a story that proved to the world, falling is not the end, rising again is.